Hello and welcome to another Crystal Confab, where I get to be with some of my favorite people on the planet, talking about my favorite thing on the planet, crystals, minerals, gemstones, and all of that good stuff. Today, I'm of course joined by Adam Barralet, Ashley Levy, and Nicholas Pearson, and we're going to talk about arguably arguably the most famous or infamous modern crystal mineral of especially the esoteric world, Larimar, the beautiful wavy blue pectolite that I'm going to show you some beautiful pieces of now. This is a really lovely slice of the beautiful Larimar, and this is a beautiful piece where you can actually see the outside of where it was formed. It forms in these beautiful volcanic vugs. And before we dive into it proper, we're going to talk a little bit about sustainability. And I think it's really important with Larimar. And I'm going to open it to the floor of my friends. Who wants to dive in first on this interesting topic of sustainability in gemstones, especially related to Larimar?
I'll have a go. So when it comes to any crystals and minerals, we were kind of talking before the show about the importance of, discussing ethical sourcing. And that's kind of the first thing I want to hit on here. And I think that this term, ethically sourced, is something that we have just seen people are using a broad brush to paint this idea of ethical sourcing. You'll see, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of Instagram pages and Etsy shops and everything saying ethically sourced minerals or consciously sourced minerals. And what does that really mean? Because there's no regulation on this phrase, there's no governing body to determine what ethically sourced really means. So when people are using this phrase, don't just take that at face value, dig in a little bit more. Um, in my eyes, there are four key components that we have to consider when we're looking at whether or not a mineral is ethically sourced. And there's like a fifth bonus one that I'll tell you about too. So, first is, are workers paid fairly for their labor? That's a big one because a lot of time they are not. Second, are workers operating in safe working conditions? And that's one that my colleagues here will pick up specifically in this conversation about Larimar because it's really important to know. So, are workers paid fairly and are they working in safe conditions? Third, is any child labor used to collect those minerals? Because this is something that, again, we see very frequently. Fourth, what is the environmental impact of that sourcing? The answer is it's never going to be zero. So we need to look at what are we okay with and what are we not? Are there reclamation efforts? What is the extent to which there is environmental impact? Does it affect the ecosystem, the plants, the wildlife in the area? Is there, toxic runoff? There are so many things to consider when we're looking at environmental impact. And this is why in some countries, they're starting to roll out more and more environmental impact studies before mining rights are granted, which is great. We're seeing a little bit of a trend that way. So those are the four things that I kind of look for at a minimum. All those boxes have to be ticked to my satisfaction before I would call something ethical. And Nicholas and I have actually had several conversations about this before, where we've talked about, and I'll let him pick up with this in a little bit, but maybe the idea of like, is there really any truly 100% ethical mineral? Because that's something we have to consider as well. But if we're striving to be more ethical in especially our consumption, looking at those four factors is important. And the fifth thing that I look for, like when I'm purchasing for my store, and not every single thing that we have in stock at my shop is guaranteed ethical, because I don't know a lot of those boxes on many of the things that we source. When there's an ethical option, I will always choose it. And when there's a really unethical option, I will always avoid it. Um, but the fifth thing that I look for is, does the purchase of those minerals give back in some way to the communities in which they came from? That's like the big extra thing. So does the money go to fund education for children in the area? Does the money go to water projects? Does it go to other environmental like cleanup projects? There are so many ways in which that money can give back to those communities. It doesn't always, but that's like a bonus one. That's not a requirement for me, but it's really, really nice when it happens. So I would love to know because Kyle, you were saying before the show, you were doing a little bit of research into Larimar, and we were talking about its sustainability, not necessarily environmental sustainability, but sustainability in terms of being a very limited resource and some of the fluctuation we've seen on and off the market with this stone because of, in particular, those worker safety conditions.
Exactly. This is something that has been really interesting because something that is so loved and appreciated, it's important to know the story of what's happening behind the scenes. And through its early days of discovery, and especially through the 90s, when it was really starting to come to the fore, all of the mines that were put down with some really dodgy wood. Like, it's moist in those conditions. You're in the tropics. It was kind of fast and quick. And through the years, not just one at a, like all at once, it's been throughout the years, there have been injuries and deaths. And leading up to the closure in sort of 2021, there were, I think, three. And it was a condition by the Dominican Republic government and the mining agency that was governing it, which I think was a Canadian one. I can't remember exactly. Forgive me. Don't quote me on it exactly, but it was an external mining company working with it. And through their combined effort, they have reinforced that whole, what do you call it? Vein, not vein, the shaft to get to the mine with concrete. So it's actually safe for the workers. It's actually going to be reinforced. It's protected from whatever is external. It's keeping the workers as they need to be safe so that they can get their resource. They can work as they should in as safer conditions as possible. Because this is the thing with mining, it can only be so safe.
And it's important to note here, you mentioned the Dominican Republic. That's the only place that this mineral comes from.
Exactly. When something comes from one place, and there are a few mines in that one place, but it is literally one country, one place, one resource. So it's going to be controlled. It's only so much of it. It is a very literal, finite resource, and we have to respect it as a finite resource. We can't just expect it to be unlimited. We can't just expect it to always come out perfectly and beautifully and always have that consistent idea of the most perfect piece of Larimar is absurd. Another example would be Tanzanite. Being from Tanzania, being from those only a few places, it is controlled, and we need to respect these sorts of things and understand that these countries also want to respect their resources and take care of their resources that are going out there into the world. And they have to take care of their people and make sure that they're not being exploited, which we love to do in the West. Sorry, facts are facts. So it's really important that we love this stone, we appreciate it, but we know that there is so much that goes into it. There are so many things. And one of the things that I love is that I have a source directly in the Dominican Republic that I've been working with for many years, that we found by luck, by accident, many years ago, my mother and I worked in her shop. And so I've been really lucky to get direct from source. I know where it's going, and I love being able to purchase from him. I'd love to hear, Adam, Nicholas, a bit of your idea about this.
I was going to say, I think it's also important, to get a little bit selfish for a second. From a spiritual context, we normally are working with our crystals from that perspective, that they are a spiritual tool. We know that crystals hold energy. So if your crystal that you are holding was mined by someone who was fearing their life, who was only 6 years old, who was being tortured, or any of those type of things, what type of energy does that crystal have? So I think it's really, really important to make sure that we are asking some questions and trying to find out as best we can. The other thing is, as well, is people worry, and I sometimes have these conversations with people, should we be taking these things out of Mother Earth? Are we ripping out the bones of Mother Earth in that way? And how I've come to peace with this, and everyone will come to peace with it in a different way. will be, well, if I'm given a gift from Mother Earth, it is my responsibility to understand it, to appreciate it, and to use it. And so that's why I'm really passionate. And you'll notice that we talk about in each of our episodes, what do we do with this crystal? How do we actually work with it so it's not just sitting on a shelf looking pretty? Now, it is nice to have a bit of a collector range and have a nice display, but they're a gift. Just like if I was to give you a gift for Christmas, and if you threw it in your back cupboard and never used it, I'd be upset. I'm sure Mother Earth is upset when we get a crystal and we just throw it in the pile and we never actually get to understand it and appreciate it as well. Now, Nicholas, you Ashley mentioned before that you were having conversations in the past about sustainability. I'd love to know a bit more about that.
Yeah, so this is one of those like big planks in my platform in general, talking about how we source crystals and the kind of ethical and moral and philosophical implications of that. And like to just call a spade, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. Capitalism as a system relies upon extraction. It relies upon the hyper accumulation of wealth at the very top of the pyramid. So if we consume anything through commerce as we know and experience it in most places in the world, we're driving that system. Now, when it comes to engaging mindfully, I think our motto should be harm reduction. The only perfectly harmless way that we can collect a rock, a mineral, a gemstone, a fossil, or whatever it is, the only way we can do that without any harm whatsoever is to do it ourselves, to leave as few footprints as possible, to disturb the environment as little as possible, to ensure that we have respectful permission to be on the land where we are, to use as few resources to get there, carbon emissions and fossil fuels and everything else. And the truth is, for most of us, if that is the only way we worked with crystals, we wouldn't have very exciting collections. I'm a big fan of rocks. I like ordinary rocks. I love my Florida limestone. I have more than a small amount of it here in the home that I work with on a regular basis. When I travel, I love to just get to know the rocks of that landscape, something that we're going to talk about in a future episode, a particular landscape and our collective love for it. But you know, the whole idea of having these conversations about the ethical implications and the sustainability of our crystals is not to make anyone feel bad for what they have and what they do and anything along those lines. The goal is to be in conversation so we can collectively do better. One of the other things that I'm really passionate about when it comes to this topic is reminding the world at large that while the crystal healing industry worldwide is, I'm sure, a multi-billion-dollar industry, it is also probably the smallest slice of the pie of mining and extraction at large. And when our community is scapegoated for the things, I can't think of a nice word, so we're just going to say the actions perpetrated by infrastructure, by transportation, by concrete, by communications technology. Honestly, that one piece of rose quartz that you've got in your house and you don't know where it comes from is the tiniest fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a drop in a great big ocean. So yes, we should do better. However, it should be an example of how the market at large can do better, because we are seeing the conversation wanting to shift things. We are seeing people wanting to do better, and retailers are responding, maybe with limited effect because we just don't have the tools we need. As Ashley mentioned, this is a fairly unregulated industry in so many ways, especially when it comes to terminology like ethically sourced, consciously sourced, and so on and so forth. So we have to trust that people are doing the best they can with the tools they've got. And I am always somehow amused and horrified by our keyboard warriors who are denouncing the world of crystals by hopping on their favorite social media platform with their smartphone or other device with a face full of makeup, which is full of pigments that are probably not so ethically sourced minerals. Mica is one of the clearest examples of unethical child labor, and nearly all of the mica that is mined for commercial use is used for the cosmetics industry. So absolutely go get on there with your face full of makeup on your device full of stolen minerals. But complain that my rose quartz and lapis lazuli are calling the downfall of the world. Um, I I will just make peace with the fact that we can't have a grown-up conversation until you can look in the mirror. And that does not absolve us from not trying to do better. We absolutely must try and do better as a crystal community, and people are slowly but surely. Of course, the market is the market, so we should always engage with it through that lens of harm reduction. Can I buy this crystal where I know its provenance? I may not know a lot about who mined it and what the circumstances were, but I know exactly where out of the earth it came from, or this identical crystal where I know absolutely nothing about it. I'm going to choose the one where I know provenance. If I know provenance and the treatment of humans, if I know not just where it came out of the earth, but also where the lapidary work was done, that's great. Like, was this mined in Arizona and sent to Indonesia to be polished and then shipped out to China for distribution, where it finally came back to Tucson, right back in Arizona? Like, it's gone around the world at least once, if not twice, when we could have just gone into our backyards and gotten it. And that's another really big consideration that I've got. So I could ramble about this for a really long time, but I'd love to see what anyone else has to say.
A couple other things that come to mind for me, and Nicholas, I'm so grateful that you brought this up. When we're looking at those little check boxes to assess if something is as ethical as possible through that framework of harm reduction, we need to be looking at every step in the process, every single part of it, from the mining or point where it is physically extracted from the earth to the processing to the distribution. We need to look at those check boxes at every step of the way. One business that does this in an amazing way, and I have to give a huge shout out, Nicholas, you know exactly who I'm going to mention, is Nairi at Crystal Auras in the UK. I have never met someone so incredibly passionate, so incredibly transparent, so generous with their knowledge, and who really has set out to make a difference and make an impact in the industry in this area. And the reason this is so important, I think we can look at something like, our food supply as a great example of this. 25, 30 years ago, we saw almost no organic produce on the market at your average grocery store, right? You'd have to go to a more specialty supermarket. There might be a very small section. We're seeing more and more and more of that available because of consumer pressure. So when we as consumers leverage our buying power in a particular direction, it also makes those other people at different points in the distribution pay attention to that, right? And maybe they're only being motivated because they see a niche area of the market that they can, capitalize on. But fine, whatever gets them there, fine. Like, we need to put that pressure on as consumers, not like Nicholas said, being the keyboard warriors necessarily, but going to our local crystal shops, talking with our fellow crystal lovers, and encouraging more ethical sourcing, right? And the way that we make these shifts in the industry is by continuing to ask for what we want and put our dollars behind it. So if we can focus on more ethically sourced minerals when it comes to our consumption of those minerals, it's going to put more and more pressure on the industry to move in that direction. Because I mentioned earlier, not every crystal that I carry at my shop is ethically sourced. I wouldn't dream of saying that. I know a lot of people do that, don't like that. But the real truth is, a lot of times we just don't know. A lot of those steps in the process are missing. There's question marks. We aren't really sure of what has happened in that supply chain. This is more prevalent for certain minerals over others. And so when we start to create those changes, right, we'll see it start to expand. And maybe, those industries, those types of minerals in particular that only come from one location, maybe there is only one mining company in charge of it. It puts the pressure even on them, even though they're the only game in town. So if you want that, you're just getting it from them no matter what. But if they see this change start to take place in the industry as a whole, it's more incentive, more encouragement for everybody to sort of take part in that change, which I think is really important.
So you may have tuned in to either watch us or listen to us to hear about this beautiful, relaxing, blissful crystal called Larimar. And now we've brought on a bit of an anxiety attack because your whole crystal collection, you have no idea where it comes from. But I think what Ashley's just summarized so beautifully there is just start asking questions. Going forward, when you buy it, just say, oh, do you know where this crystal came from? And those questions, if enough people ask those questions, like with the food industry, you'll start to see that consumer demand drive shop owners asking their suppliers, well, where did this come from? And so on. So that can create a ripple effect. So we did not want to give you an anxiety attack today. We did not want you to get rid of all your crystals. We want you to love them and use them, but we wanted to also give you some action steps as well. So let's explore this beautiful stone called Larimar. Now, I'm really interested, Kyle, because you feel that this is a really nice one. It's obviously, it's found in the Caribbean. It looks like that kind of oceanic blue that we all want to escape to of the oceans there. You find it a really good balance, I believe, between water and fire?
Yes. Now, I want people to consider both the process of how it was made, coming from volcanic vugs, volcanic veins. It is a pectolite that is formed within those volcanic veins. So there's a bit of fire already in its process. Secondarily, it comes from the Caribbean. You Americans will probably say Caribbean. I'm probably not saying it correctly. The Caribbean for me, and anywhere that is tropical, is hot, right? It is hot and wet. It is humid. It has this combination of warmth and wetness. That's a weird way of putting things. And for me, Larimar encourages and connects those two elements. And both of them, for me, align to our emotions. Our emotional center is both watery and fiery. And I find Larimar beautifully harmonizing and balancing of the emotional center. It helps me to feel more chill when I need to feel more chill, but it also allows me to take action when I need to take action. I find it uplifting. I find it buoyant, like water in warmer places, you float better than when it's colder because of that expansion of the molecules within the water. The idea of being able to be somewhere tropical, which Larimar invites, is relaxing, but I want to play, I want to have fun, and I want to feel good. Like for me, it's holiday mode, and holiday is a mix of fun and relaxation. Larimar has the ability to let yourself have fun, let yourself unleash a little bit, let yourself just bring on that inner power of fire and water. And I love bringing that together. I've used it many, many times in my life when I either know I'm feeling a bit emotionally volatile. It's one of those ones that I love to wear just to make sure I don't go over the edge. Now, many of you may or may not know this, but I have 5 placements in fire. And I have 3 placements in water within my astrological chart. So I am ruled by fire and water. It is the biggest part of kind of where I work, and it's emotional. And so I find Larimar as a balance. So, so beautiful and so, so perfect. Yes, you can wear it as a throat chakra energy. You can use it to communicate truth and connect to that beautiful energy. Yes, it works on unlocking psychic energy and tapping into that. Yes, it works on allowing us to tap into that divine feminine. All of these things for me lie within fire and water. They all lie within all of that beautiful mess that can be really all over the place, but it can also be contained and really, really beautiful. And I think if you kind of look and get lost and look at that kind of water playing on light thing, and then there's another layer, right? The sun is shining through the water to create that effect. It takes a little bit of illumination for us to see the truth. It takes a little bit of perspective. It takes a bit of brightness for us to engage properly, to understand it properly. If we're always coming from an objective place, if we're always coming from an emotional place, if we're always coming from one place, then we're not getting the full experience. But if we let ourselves feel, if we let ourselves get a bit fiery, if we let ourselves balance it all, I think Larimar teaches that you can find that balance and harmony within yourself. Maybe it's just me and all of my extra fire. The fire and the water thing is more prevalent. Maybe it's more of a personal thing. I'd love to know from you all. But I think it really helps to not just balance and harmonize the fire, but utilize your energy correctly. Like it allows you to not burn out. It allows you to be a bit more organic. It allows you to go with the flow, which we love about Larimar, right? So it means that you're not fighting the currents that are happening. It means that you're not fighting against what you're feeling. And maybe you need to feel your feels a second and then roll into the next thing with clarity. Like, don't feel like I just need to get my shit together, pardon my French, and then move on to the next thing. Maybe you actually need to go, ooh, that was a big thing. Let's like feel that. Let's address that. Let's know that that affected me. Then I can let it go. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I love the way of, bringing this fire element in. One thing that I'm surprised not more people know, but I show a lot is if you get yourself a thin slab of Larimar, and, I don't have a candle with me at the moment, but if you shine light through it, it kind of looks and brings out that beautiful kind of like you are looking at those Caribbean oceans type of thing. So it's a beautiful way to place or hold it near a candle and just watch that flickering light behind a slab. Really slows you down, really helps with the emotions and brings that calmness while still having that little flame that we want to have. Don't want to null out or dull ourselves out at all.
Adam, I am so glad that you just gave that demonstration because there is this like incorrect piece of information floating around on the internet, and it has been for several years. And I don't exactly know where it started, but the incorrect info said that a way of testing to see whether or not your Larimar is fake is to shine a light through it, and if it's translucent at all, if any light comes through, then it's fake. That is not correct, as we just saw demonstrated by Adam's beautiful Larimar. Like most things, you slice it thin enough, you're going to see some light through it, right? So, like, come on. But in addition to that incorrect piece of information about fake Larimar, actually brings two other quick things to mind that I want to share. So, there is out there something that people are calling green Larimar. And sometimes you'll see it called green alabaster. And what it actually is like some sort of smelted glass stuff. It's produced in China. It's very pretty, but it is not Larimar. There is no like minty green Larimar. You'll see in Larimar, in natural Larimar, it can have areas that are a little bit more tealy, greeny blue, but you're not going to see this like minty green color. That's not a thing. The other one that's out there is really interesting. And this just started about 2 years ago, as far as I can tell. Pink Larimar. Does anybody want to guess what it is? Well, I've seen actually two things called this pink Larimar. Thompsonite, because when it's polished, it sort of gets that same pattern that beautiful Larimar has, but it's pink. And then scolecite is the other one. When it's like that peachy scolecite, I've seen that called like pink Larimar also. Larimar, as we discussed, only comes from the Dominican, and it's in particular the blue variety of Pectolite. There's also other Pectolites that come like from various places in Africa that are like more red. Sometimes you'll see them called red Larimar. That one at least almost makes a little bit more sense because at least it's the same mineral. But Larimar is blue, and it's the only color that it comes in. So couple little tips for fake things when you're out there shopping. And Adam, thank you for showing that demonstration because that's a huge help showing that is not a good way to test if your Larimar is fake.
And just quickly, I'm pretty sure the pink Larimar is naturalite. I'm pretty sure it's just a polished variety of naturalite that they found.
You're right. Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for correcting me. Yes.
Mm. One thing I'd love to, I don't know, and Nicholas, you're always amazing for the history of crystals as well. So you may be able to throw me under the bus and correct me here. But I've also heard a story about the famous prophet and psychic Edgar Cayce. And he had a lot of interest in Atlantis and would often talk about, I can see them working with this stone, with this crystal, and he'd describe it. And his description basically was of Larimar, but at that time, Larimar had yet to be discovered. And it wasn't until after his death that Larimar was actually found. So there has been some links between, was Larimar connected to the Atlanteans as well? Do you have any kind of, apart from my hearsay, do you have any facts based on that?
Yeah, so Edgar Casey did these just practically uncountable number, like unfathomable number of life readings that he did in a trance state, and had to have someone there transcribing it, and sometimes on tape recorder when technology got a little bit better. And an astonishing number of those readings included information about past lives in Atlantis. And Casey's vision of Atlantis looks very different to some of the previous ones that we see that are out there. And while he does mention gemstones in quite a number of readings, Shelley Kerr, a friend of mine, she's written a couple of different books on Edgar Casey and his approach to gemstones. There's another couple ones that are out there, one of which is long since out of print, and the other one I'm not sure if it's still around, but Shelley does the best job of any of them and makes it certainly the newest one she's written is the most easy to navigate of any of these resources. But like the primary material that Casey talked about was what he called, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation because there are a whole lot of vowels in this channeled name, but he called them the tuaoi or the tuaoi, and they were also known as firestones. They were thought to be the source of power, and he described them as looking a lot like quartz. Another material that he also wrote about, or channeled about, I should say, and was transcribed, was a material that may have been blue to green, but he used some really anachronistic names for it. Lapis ligurius was one of them, and so it got kind of conflated with some other things. There's some theories that it might have been a copper mineral like chrysocolla, or maybe even a copper-bearing chalcedony. But the truth is, he was not a mineralogist, although some of his readings had astonishingly good and accurate details about metallurgical processes and like historical approaches to mining. He was not a mineralogist, so the chemistry of it, the nomenclature and crystallography wasn't what he was aiming for. But because of the popularity of Atlantis in the New Age, because of the discovery of this stone very recently, like 50 years ago, I think it was like 1970s, I want to say, when it was like brought to market for the first time, 1974-ish. With those two things overlapping and, people like patterns. We're human beings. We want to see patterns, whether or not anyone else does. If we hope hard enough, we see them. And so this has taken on the nickname of the Atlantis stone, albeit with only very, very, very oblique tangential connection to Casey's original material. Certainly his life readings and his readings about gemstones, sometimes overlapping, sometimes not, kind of tilled the soil for this to come up over and over again. We also see really strong influence from the channeled material from Guru Das and Gem Elixirs and Vibrational Healing, the 2 volumes of that. Those were like some of the really big ones. But ultimately, I think the biggest connection we've got in the modern day comes from someone that I consider to be the kind of mother of the modern crystal healing movement. That's Katrina Raphael. She channeled a lot of information about crystals, relating them to both Atlantis and Lemuria, and her depictions also look different to those of some of her predecessors because they were her own inspiration, her own personal gnosis. But that definitely cements this kind of, we'll say, pedigree, this lineage of these forgotten lands under the seas, and this stone being related.
Now, moving on as well, with it such soothing energy, do you find that this would be a really great one, Nicholas, for any kind of healing as well?
Yeah, I love Larimar. It is just there's something so whimsical about it that, like, just if you get a piece with enough of saturated color and enough texture in it, you could just get lost for hours. You turn it in the light, and those little fibrous crystals that it's made from will kind of give you that chatoyant, that cat's eye effect. And the whimsy of it speaks to healing the inner child. And I think that there's something so magical that synthesizes a little bit of what everyone's talking about that kind of makes this connection for us as well. So if we kind of leverage that maritime, that aqueous imagery that Kyle was initiating us into, I think we can take it a little one step further with relation to healing the inner child. So for me, Larimar is just inseparable from this kind of watery imagery. And I'm a child from South Florida. I grew up, arguably, my grandmother says I could swim before I could walk. I think that's the extent of my athleticism in life, that and marching band. But I just have such a deep love for the water and particularly for the ocean. And I don't do direct sun. I'm a ginger. We can't handle that. But I still feel so nurtured when I get anywhere remotely near the water. And this is kind of a cross-cultural image where we tend to depict like the kind of supernal mother, the cosmic mother, the primordial womb out of which life emerged as the oceans, whether it doesn't matter where you go. And there's some truth in this, right? Life did begin in water, in the very ancient primordial oceans. And for me, even the formation that Larimar takes inside these little vesicles and amygdalae, these like little empty pockets inside the extrusive igneous rock that it formed in, that later these silica and salt-rich liquids came through and deposited the mineral behind. It's like little wombs in which it's incubated. So there's something so maternal about this stone. It makes me think of just being bathed in the cosmic arms of the Great Mother. I think this is such a great stone for getting in touch with that part of us that responds in the moment to feeling hurt or scared or alone. That inner child, whether we use that in like the kind of Jungian psychological construct or just in the kind of pop psychology way of that inner part of us that demands play, that remembers the past. Larimar can help us reassure the inner child, to nourish it, to love it unconditionally, to be our own kind of inner parent. Whether or not we had good and wonderful and happy childhoods, we all had terrible things happen at some point, whether it's as simple as like tripping and falling or something worse. And it's really visceral the way we can respond to kind of the neural pathways that are built in those moments. Um, I am an anxious grown up. I was an anxious child. Go figure. There's probably some sort of correlation there. And when I work with something like Larimar, it reminds me to kind of step out of that autonomic response and to go into the, you know what, those feelings, I understand why you feel them. That makes a lot of sense. But let's look at it from this perspective. Let's take a look and go, hey, maybe this event is unrelated to the other one. Maybe we don't have to go into flight or fight or fawn or freeze or however many Fs we use now. And there's something so gentle and heartwarming about this stone. No surprise that it gets its color from traces of copper, which we've talked about in the past is such a wonderful emotional kind of balancer. So yeah, I think the stone is so nurturing, and the synthesis of those elemental forces and the imagery of the ocean as the thing that birthed all life. I think that ties in so beautifully.
I totally
I really love what you said about. Oh, sorry, go on, Carl.
I was just going to say I totally respond to the water, the ocean, the beach aspect. We being from Perth, Adam and I, we are also coastal babies. I personally learned to swim before I could walk. I was swimming at the beach from 3, 2, and so I love that connection, and it totally makes sense. It's just, I think, the most easy place to get free therapy is the beach. Like, it's just everything all in one, and Larimar is that in a stone.
Mm. And I've heard a term before of landlocked mermaids, and this probably not so much the case in places like Australia, because we all do tend to live around the coast. There's not much inland, but in America, of course, you've got cities all throughout, and to get to the beach may be a plane flight or a very long drive as well. And for those that have that yearning, that maybe grew up near the beach but no longer there for different circumstances, Larimer and maybe even having an oceanic altar in your home, we can at least connect with that oceanic energy would be really healing as well, I feel, as well. Before we go on, I do want to kind of give an honorable mention. You may notice, if you watch us on YouTube each week, that Kyle and I go to great lengths to dress in theme. And we have done really exceptionally well today with our Larimer theming. But then Nicholas decided to upstage us this week. Nicholas, would you like to show us what you're drinking out of?
This is my favorite mug. It is mermaid themed. One of the very first gifts my husband ever gave me when we first started dating some time ago. So yeah, I'm Larimar themed inside and out.
Yeah. Nicholas wins a point this week. Well done, Nicholas. Now, I also love this feeling of talking about this primordial ocean that all life came out of this. And magically, we can also use this as a really beautiful manifestation tool as well. So taking your Larimar to the beach, and if you can't get to the beach or the coastline, visualizing that and almost kind of sending your wish or your desire as you hold the Larimar out over the ocean, and then feeling that ebb and flow of the waves slowly bringing it to you as well. Just as we maybe plant our desires, to the stars or in the ground, you can actually work with the ocean, and Larimar is a really great one for manifesting different things when we work with that oceanic energy. One classic example I really wanted to share today with Larimar, though, is something that you would normally not associate Larimar with, and that's love. So in my past lives, I worked in a crystal shop, and we had a regular client who would come in, and she was very successful in her career, very A-type personality, and she's like, "Right, Adam, you got to help me find my next crystal. I need to find a man." And she said, I'm keep on attracting these men, and they're very, they're dominating, they're bullish, they're not very sympathetic, all this type of thing. They're not, we're just clashing because we're two A-type personalities. What's a good love crystal? So I took her around the store, and we were looking at all things from, kunzite to morganite to rhodochrosite, a lot of the, traditional love crystals. And yes, I even showed her rose quartz. But, then she was like, "What about this Larimar? I really like this blue stone." I'm like, "Well, it's not really. It's more of a calming. It's more of a healing. It's more of the things we've been talking about in this episode so far about. It's not really." But she's like, "No, I really want that peace." I'm like, "Okay, well, we've got to listen to your intuition." So she got this beautiful Larimar pendant, and off she went, very happy with her purchase. Anyway, she comes back to see me about 3 weeks later, and she's like, "Adam, I've met someone." I'm like, "Oh, wow." And she's like, "But the really interesting thing is, he's not like any of the other men that I've ever been with. He's a lot calmer, he's a lot more gentle. And to be honest with you, normally, if that kind of guy came and spoke to me, I actually wouldn't give them a second chance. But I gave this guy a second chance, and it's actually developing really quite nicely." So I think sometimes with abundance, we're thinking about wanting to bring things into our life and have them delivered. But Larimar can also be used to, almost like the ocean, to open us up to be more willing to where that comes from. When we ask for love from the universe, we can't go, "I want love, but I want it from him." Or "I want more money, but I want it from there." Larimar is a really beautiful one for just allowing us to go with the flow of life. And so if you do want to manifest something, if you've got some goals for 2025, Larimar could be a really nice one to just kind of take the pressure off yourself and the universe of how it must look. Because when we can relax a little bit more, the oceans of manifestation and of abundance may deliver something that may look like just a bit of driftwood, but may actually be some treasure in the end. So I think it's really great for manifestation. And possibly if you keep on meeting the same old kind of losers in relationships, maybe Larimar might help you kind of turn the tides and go for someone who's not your type, but could actually be really complementary and a really powerful relationship.
Love that. I think that's amazing. And I just had a brainwave right now of a way that you could work with that, with Larimer's energy. Think about like a message in a bottle and putting it out there into the ocean. Like you could just have a little bottle on your altar and you put that message in with a piece of Larimar, maybe not in the bottle, it might not come out, on the outside or next to it. And like put your manifestation into that and let it go and let it come to you when it needs to, or let it arrive when it needs to, because message in the bottles are going to go out there and go where they need to go, wherever the tides take them. I just came to me then, and I felt like I needed to share it as a way to work with it.
No, I love that as well. I'm not sure if I would encourage people also, I like the altar idea. Yes, do that. I'm not sure whether people should be going to the coast and throwing bottles in the water. There's enough trash in there. We don't need another plastic Coke bottle with your little note in it. But even a visualization of sending that message over the ocean or out into the ocean in some way could be a powerful way of doing that. I love that for sure. Now, obviously, another thing that's connected to the oceans is the moon. And we've got a full moon coming up this week, Ashley.
We do. I am so excited. Our release date for this episode coincides with the full moon in Cancer. And so much of what we've been talking about when it comes to Larimar, I think will be really beneficial for this time. So a lot of people get wrapped up in this idea that like you have to do full moony things on the day of the full moon. Like it's a window, you have time. And a lot of people will really sort of relish in this energy for the full month. So from the new moon prior until the next new moon, that full moon's obviously going to fall right in the middle. That whole lunar cycle, that whole month, you can work with this energy. So don't feel like, oh, I listened to the podcast 4 days later. Now I can't tap into the energy of the Cancer full moon. Like, no, don't worry about it. You're good. So when I think of Larimar and I think about its connection to the Cancer full moon for me, I'm thinking about these qualities that make Larimar really special. So for me, it's kind of about communication. And we talked about actually some alternative names for Larimar, one of them being Atlantis stone, but another one is dolphin stone because it's coming from the Caribbean or Caribbean and looking so beautiful. And, dolphins are so advanced in their communication. We're still learning things about them all the time. So having some Larimar that you're working with to enhance your communication, especially with your family, with your loved ones, with your close friends, is really beneficial during this time of the full moon in Cancer. Because when the moon is in Cancer, your home and your family life are kind of taking center stage and making sure that you have some clear communication, that you have that compassion, that love for the people in your life really helps things go really smoothly. But I think the most prominent thing is that these are things that we often take for granted, right? And so reminding you to be grateful for those people in your life, even if they get on your nerves sometimes. Be grateful for your home. Be grateful for this nourishing space that you've created during this time of Cancer when we can be feeling a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more raw, is such a comfort. Like Nicholas was talking about, sort of that energy of the womb, like let that be your home. Let that be your space with your family and work with some Larimar during this time to just sort of get in flow and help you cultivate more awareness of that energy. I think that's sort of the key. One thing that I love to do is a little exercise where you can hold some Larimar, go through each room of your home, start wherever you like, but hold some Larimar, breathe for a few minutes, and then with some fresh eyes, look around the room and notice anything that might need a little bit of TLC. Now, I'm not saying you have to go spend thousands of dollars doing a remodel project. Just look at something that's maybe a little worn out. Look at something that needs to be repaired. Look at something that maybe you don't use anymore that you could pass along to someone else who would really appreciate it. Like this kind of uh, action taking within your home, this kind of energy that you can cultivate in your home during this lunar cycle will really set you up for success because I feel like you're just putting in that effort, you're putting in that time and space to create an environment that really supports you, that really supports your family. And just moves you into alignment with what you want your life to look like and feel like. And, we're at the time of the new year in our Gregorian calendar. So this is a good time to do a little bit of those sprucing up projects around the house as well. So take this opportunity of this lunar cycle at the Cancer full moon to work with Larimar to give you a little bit of inspiration, see your space with some fresh eyes, and put in that love and attention into some action taking in your home.
I love that idea, and it's actually become a bit of a ritual of mine. I love that the full moon of Cancer is always around this time of year because we have these lofty goals, but we want to have that stable base in, like, we want to feel safe and secure and nurtured at home, and we want to be secured by feel, I guess, Yeah, supported by our family and our inner circle, which Cancer is all about as well. So the 1st of January is declutter day for me. And I went through my wardrobe and cleared out space there, went through the linen cupboard, went through the kitchen, went through my books. And it really does create such a lovely space for the new year. There are some things that are feeling a bit bare, feeling a bit kind of open now, but it actually creates a space feng shui wise as well for new energy to come in. New things can't come in if you haven't released the old. So it's beautiful kind of ritual to do around this time. I love that, Ashley.
Yeah, it's like that inner and outer environment thing, right? Your outer environment has such a big impact on you, but it's also often a reflection of like what's going on inside. So taking some time to get intentional about creating some change in your space can really do wonders for how you feel inside.
Yeah. I always say the state of your house is the state of your mind. And when I say that, some people look around their house and they start to get a bit of a shock. So it's a really great time to do that for sure. Yeah. Now, obviously, let's do a little bit of shameless self-promotion. You talk about Larimar and the Cancer full moon in one of your books, Ashley.
I do. So my book, Cosmic Crystals, goes through the 13 full moons of the year, looking at them through different lenses and talking about some recommended crystals. But in addition to discussing the full moons, I also talk about the moon in the different houses, the different phases of the moon, and give a mini ritual for one way to work with the moon in each of those circumstances using your crystals. So like Adam was saying earlier, actually working with our crystals, putting them to good use to honor and respect the ones that we have. There are some great tips and tricks for how to do that. You can find the book anywhere books are sold, and you can order signed copies from me directly at my shop at mimosaspirit.com.
I remember once you have done your decluttering as well, you've got rid of all the old books, you've made space for some new ones. Below, we have our links where you can find many of our books and lots of our content as well. So you can bring some new knowledge in if you're loving everything that we do as well. Now, as we wrap up this episode on Larimar, is there any final ways that anyone has either used it in the past or used it in the future that feels that, our listeners and our viewers might benefit from?
I have a really simple practice that I do with Larimar when I'm either experiencing big emotions and need some time to process or space to process, or when I just want to get in touch with my inner child. And I'll take two small pieces. I have two little tumbles here, not super expensive, depending on what the market does up and down from year to year. And I'll just place one over my diaphragm, basically where the solar plexus is, and one over my sternum, where the heart chakra might be, if that's the system you use, and just allow the energy of this stone to permeate as I do those really deep breaths, so I feel both my diaphragm and my ribs expand.
I absolutely love that.
That's really
Kyle, have
beautiful.
you got one as well?
I think we would be remiss not to talk about Larimar's connection to the female archetype and the divine female archetype. I love Larimar connecting to those that I have in spirit that are feminine, my grandmothers, my sister in spirit. Those may like to connect to divine feminine archetypes, goddesses, etc. out there. The moon herself, I find Larimar has that deep connection to femininity in a grand scale on the world at large. So if you are trying to tap into that a bit more in any way, shape, or form, just wear your Larimar, hold your Larimar, use your Larimar in any way that you can. I think it's really beautiful for that.
And in one last little bit of shameless self-promotion, I really want to take a moment to celebrate Nicholas because by the time this episode comes out, he will be celebrating in a big way his book birthday for Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense. So Nicholas, that's so exciting. Congrats. I know when we're recording, it comes out tomorrow, right?
Thank you, thank you. I've got my author copies and it's slowly making its way into the world. I've actually seen people post that they have already gotten copies. So some retailers have received them early and are shipping. So I'm just so grateful. Larimar is not in here, but lots of the stones that we have talked about and will talk about here on the Confab are going to be in it. And it's 145 gemstones for banishing, binding, and magical protection.
Wow. Can I ask, Nicholas? Obviously, I'm guessing you've got some of the normal ones we talk about. What are some of the more rare crystals that you cover in your book?
Oh, Hubnerite, Ferberite, Priscilli Bluestone, and Sarsen Stone, Isla Rose Marble, which I fell in love with kind of by accident, and then shared that love with some people that I know. I've got a couple Aussie rocks in there. You'll find Nunderite in it. As well as one that's a classic here in the States called Novaculite, which is close relative of flint, but undergoes a small amount of metamorphosis that changes it. Definitely, you're going to find your classic things like amber and jet and hematite and carnelian and some other great things. But I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that there are some weird rocks, some common rocks, some humble stones from your backyard. I endeavored to make about 20% of the crystals in it things I've never written about before. So there'll be something new. Even if you've got all my books, there'll be new crystals that you haven't seen in them yet.
Well, I'm regretting asking that now because you just listed some crystals that I don't have in my collection. So I think we're going to have to wrap up this episode because I've got to jump online and do some shopping and get some ethically sourced crystals that you just mentioned. So thank you very much for joining us for this episode of Crystal Confab. We hope you enjoyed our confab about the amazing Larimar. But remember, we are just four humble people that know a little bit about crystals. We can all learn more when you leave a comment down below and share your experiences of how you work with Larimar as well. Until next episode, take care and we'll see you then. Blessed be.